Hello, everyone. My name is Eric. I'm a limited licensed master social worker and psychotherapist. I've been working with children, youth, and adults for 10 years. What is bipolar disorder? In common parlance, virtually everything can be bipolar at times, whether it's the weather, the stock market, or your own mother. People seem to use this term to describe things that are back and forth, up and down, or erratic to whatever degree they don't actually understand. But this isn't bipolar disorder. I think that it's both stigmatizing and dangerous to think of bipolar disorder as simply mood swings, or to compare it to things that just kind of mildly irritate us. I don't blame anyone in particular when they refer something as bipolar. I get what they mean, but it only muddies the water for young clinicians who are on the lookout for bipolar disorder and how confusing and scary it can be to actually meet someone with a true bipolar illness for the first time. Not to say that these people are inherently scary, they usually aren't, but their behaviors will likely leave you scratching your head at best and afraid for their safety at worst. So with that being said, the purpose of this video is to provide some psychoeducation about bipolar disorder. That is, some education about the illness, its signs and symptoms, its prognosis, differential diagnostic considerations, and to highlight the lived experience of some people that I have personally worked with over my career that genuinely suffer from bipolar disorder. The diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder according to the DSM-5-TR can be seen on the screen. I'm going to cover some of the more confusing signs and symptoms so you can have a better idea of what to listen for when meeting people in your practice for the first time. A great book that makes diagnosing bipolar disorder a much simpler affair is Memorable Psychiatry by Jonathan Helt. He has a series here on YouTube as well, and I'd recommend checking that out. But here are some of the less obvious signs and symptoms of bipolar disorder that I think you should all be on the lookout for. Distractibility, talkativeness, and the flight of ideas. These people will sit down in your office and they will spew their feelings and frustrations for 50 minutes straight without a pause or giving you a second to interrupt or ask questions. They're likely going to be going on tangents and freely associate from one topic to another. They'll begin their sentence talking about how they got into an argument with their mother and end it about how the esoteric philosophy of love is the reason for humanity's trials and tribulations. This is a major red flag for a current manic episode. James Hillman's thoughts amplify this idea. The main thing for the manic speaker is that nobody should interrupt because it makes you very angry. There should be no interruptions and no disturbances, and there's no particular logic to the talk. It is a flight of ideas, as they call it. One thing just follows another through free associations. Whatever comes to mind, whatever sound you hear, if some little noise comes in from the outside, then that gets incorporated too as long as it keeps moving. Impulsivity and goal-directed behavior. People will tell you about their past and how they have moved around a lot. Patients have frequently told me that they've moved all around the country, lived in high-class California neighborhoods, into dirty, poverty-stricken dumps, and slept in gas station bathrooms. These are all major red flags for bipolar disorder. Along with the impulsivity comes anger. If they have a long history of fighting with their parents and significant others, or anyone really, their inability to control their anger usually makes leaving the obvious next step. Usually these people are kicked out, thrown out, or evicted in some form or fashion. Goal-directed behavior is fairly simple to understand. If they want something, they will do whatever it takes to get it. Do they want to leave the situation? They may steal a car or take out a loan to buy one. Do they want sex? They will solicit it at any price, or with or without protection. During a manic episode, a person is described as, in the words of James Hillman again, an instrument of action. They are less aware of themselves as a physical presence than they are as a force. They live in action. They describe their life in terms of verbs. They must do, create, go, leave. They simply cannot be. Grandiosity. This can be very obvious or incredibly subtle. I'll give you a couple of examples. First off, anything that qualifies as blatantly narcissistic counts as grandiose. During intake, a client was expressing to me his views on women, and they came off as aggressively misogynistic and derogatory. He said that he has a superior taste in music to virtually everyone, and that it was hard to get along with people who liked shitty punk music, a criticism that I took silently to heart since my favorite band is Blink-182. He considered himself highly intelligent and name-dropped a bunch of philosophers that he's read over the years. All of this was incredibly apparent to me, but in the absence of the rest of the relevant signs and symptoms, one might be tempted to describe him as just a narcissistic personality. Another intake I did with another individual mentioned to me that he could pay off his treatment in full. When I asked how, he said, "Well, I'm in the process of selling my house." When I asked him where he was going to live, he responded, "I can pull some strings. I have a law degree and I know a lot of people," as if that qualified as an answer to my question. Other signs and symptoms. A decreased need for sleep is another red flag for bipolar disorder. Although there could be a multitude of different reasons for decreased sleep, I generally ask follow-up questions that help clarify the diagnosis. For example, I ask, "Do you typically sleep less than 4 to 5 hours per night?" If the answer is yes, I ask how long it's been going on for. If they say something like, "I've always had trouble sleeping," this might indicate insomnia or anxiety, but then I follow up with, "Do you feel like you need sleep? Are you able to get things done despite your lack of sleep?" This is important to understand because the diagnostic concept of increased energy despite lack of sleep is a major symptom of mania. The Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual reads, "Some patients in a manic state insist that sleep is literally a waste of time." Another important question to ask is if the person has ever been on any medication. Be attentive to the kinds of medication that they are on or that they have been on in the past. People who are on or have taken any mood-stabilizing medications like duloxetine, which is an SNRI, lamotrigine, lithium, or loricidone, are likely to have already been evaluated and diagnosed as having a bipolar illness in the past. Antipsychotics like Abilify or Vraylar are typically prescribed to people who have been admitted to the hospital during a manic episode to quickly bring down mania, or to those who have had issues with the side effects of mood-stabilizing medications. Here is a major red flag that I make sure that I ask about during every diagnostic session to distinguish a bipolar illness from a major depressive episode. If the person takes an antidepressant medication, specifically an SSRI, ask how it makes them feel. Typically, the response will be neutral. If a person has depression, the antidepressant should not make them feel amazing. It should make them not feel like shit, or make them not want to kill themselves. If a person is currently taking an SSRI and they say to you, "Man, I feel great, what's in those things?" This is a major red flag. Antidepressants are supposed to help bring you up to a euthymic state, not elevate you into a manic one. The last major indicator of a bipolar illness is the presence of psychotic-like symptoms. Many people with bipolar disorder will attempt suicide. In fact, according to the DSM-5, as much as 25% of all completed suicides could be the result of an undiagnosed bipolar disorder, as the suicide rates are generally about 15% higher than in the general population, making bipolar disorder an incredibly dangerous illness, especially when manic, which is when most people have the energy and intent to commit suicide. Delusions, especially grandiose, narcissism, and paranoia are also major red flags for bipolar disorder with psychotic features. When patients get so mad they black out, or they cannot remember the details of the events that led them to their hospitalization, this is described as a bipolar blackout. Prognosis. Bipolar disorder is a chronic mental illness, meaning that the person who has it will most likely be coping with the illness for the rest of their life. This leaves many people with bipolar disorder feeling defeated and scared. One of the saddest but truest statements I've ever heard is that you don't have bipolar disorder has you. With that being said, probably the most difficult aspect of having bipolar disorder is having to come to terms with the fact that life without mania is incredibly understimulating. Understandably, people love being manic because it makes them feel great. The old psychoanalytic term for bipolar disorder was manic depressive illness, in which it was first conceptualized that mania was actually a psychological defense mechanism against depression. I think this concept still rings true for a lot of people, despite the more contemporary research on mania from a perspective of biological psychiatry. With that being said, with long-term medication management being a staple in the treatment of bipolar disorder, I have witnessed patients be successfully reduced to the literal lowest doses of medications which they could safely be on to free them from manic and psychotic symptoms for quite long periods of time. Weekly or biweekly psychotherapy as an adjunct to this medication management is not always necessary but is always helpful. The biggest hurdle is, again, that people who are no longer manic are left with the depressive side of the illness that, for them, feels like being given the short end of an already short stick. They can no longer experience the pleasures of mania, but they are left with the full experience of depression. This can be compounded by the fact that traditional antidepressants are, as we have already said, not appropriate for these people, so their only hope of managing their depression is by learning new techniques to modify their depressive belief systems and use cognitive and behavioral coping skills to effectively cope with a life that is significantly less interesting than it was before. Many people with bipolar disorder consider this trade-off to be not worth it, and so they will likely terminate treatment one way or another, either by deciding that they're going to stop taking their medications or by doing something more drastic and impulsive. In my career, I've had patients terminate treatment on me to move across the country instead of following up with psychiatry and psychotherapy. At the end of the day, I did everything I could to help them and not hurt them, so their choice is exactly that. Their choice. After all, you can do anything you want as long as you understand the consequences, and you can do nothing at all as long as you understand the consequences. Differential diagnosis. Bipolar disorder can be as confusing to diagnose as it can be to have. A major factor in bipolar disorder is emotional reactivity. People sometimes confuse a bipolar illness for what is actually better described as a characteristic of a cluster B personality disorder, such as borderline personality, histrionic personality, narcissistic personality, or antisocial personality disorder. These people tend to switch moods faster than a person with bipolar disorder. Even a rapid cycling bipolar disorder, a manic and depressive episode up to 4 times per year, is much more stable than a person with a cluster B personality disorder. These people can switch moods at the drop of a hat and go from 0 to 100 in a second. It's not impossible for these personality disorders to be coexisting with a bipolar illness, but just keep in mind the rapidity of the mood switching when considering a diagnosis of bipolar disorder or a cluster B personality disorder. Bipolar disorder obviously has its depressive and anxious components, so be aware that people coming into treatment might not be reporting manic symptoms at all. But that's why the questions are necessary to ask during the initial interview. In children, especially under the age of 12, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder should be ruled out before giving a diagnosis of pediatric bipolar disorder. 2 clinical vignettes, 1 positive, 1 negative. A 35-year-old white cisgender male came into my private practice seeking treatment because he knows he needs help. Going through his long history, several events stick out to me. He graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in accounting, and he had a decent job, saved up money, and bought a house. After getting fired from his job for not getting along with his boss, he sold his house and bought a van. During this period of his life, around 24 or 25, he bought a van to travel in. He worked at a local restaurant and fell in love, one-sidedly, with a 17-year-old waitress who did not reciprocate his feelings for her. He reportedly spent $5,000 on a piece of jewelry to give to her that she ultimately rejected. This rejection hurt him deeply, and after being reported for allegedly harassing the girl, he was moved to another store. It didn't take long before he decided that he was going to travel across the country and move out west. There, he dabbled in substance use and esoteric yoga practices. He had no sexual experience, but deeply wanted an intimate partner. After getting into a one-sided infatuation with a roommate, he decided to leave the West Coast and head for Colorado, where he continued to live in his van. That situation inevitably came to an end, and he moved back to his home state. He rented a house with the little money that he had left and was soon hospitalized for psychosis because he would listen to really loud music during the day and be outside singing and reading tarot on his front lawn. He was released from the hospital into the care of his parents, and he did not continue his medication because the system was trying to keep him down. After 4 months of generally unproductive weekly psychotherapy, he became increasingly agitated with his parents and decided that his only option was to move across the state to his sister's house. I told him that telehealth psychotherapy probably wouldn't be helpful or even possible if he didn't have the support system or a stable living situation. He moved in with his sister, and within 3 weeks, he had gotten kicked out, went on a cross-country tour again, and at this point, I thought that I would never see him again. 3 months later, he returned after having been hospitalized for a manic episode and was put on a fairly strong dose of antipsychotic medication. He was drained, physically, mentally, and spiritually. We started weekly psychotherapy again with monthly medication management, and progress was slow but steady. Within 4 months, he was able to decrease to the lowest dosage of medication and has since been free from self-harm and suicidal ideation. He still has a long way to go, but his understanding of himself and his illness has significantly improved, and in doing so, he has improved his relationship with his family. He is no longer a danger to himself or others, and he is fighting the battle against depression that characterizes this phase of the illness. His biggest obstacle is trying to figure out the point of his life if he is not being propelled by manic fuel. A 65-year-old white cisgender male comes into my private practice seeking help coping with his recent divorce. He says that he has a really strong personality and a bad temper, and that he can tear you to shreds, not that it's a good thing. He mentioned that he's worked as a respiratory therapist his entire life, but also somehow has a law degree, which I cannot verify. He tells me that he recently started taking sertraline and was prescribed to him by his doctor, which he's known for decades. The prescription was filled 3 years ago, but he has only started taking them now, and he feels great recently. In fact, upon meeting him for the first time, he's smiling, joking, laughing, and genuinely appears excited to start treatment. "I'll see you next week," he says as he leaves the office. Monday goes by, no call, no show. I followed up with a text message. No response. Okay, no problem. People back out of treatment. It's just something they do. No big deal. I'll keep him on the schedule. Second week, the following Monday, no call, no show. I consider him to be definitely gone, but I'm starting to feel concerned because he hasn't responded to my calls and messages. 2 days later, I get a message at the office that this man has been released from the hospital and wants to reschedule with me. Damn it, Mike, I think to myself. I get in contact with him and he virtually begs me to take him back, even though I never dismissed him in the first place. I say, "No worries, man, just come in at 12 p.m. on Monday." Monday comes around. This time he calls and he says that he's on his way, but never shows up. This I found extremely puzzling, but putting 2 and 2 together, I realized that he was manic, and so pretty much none of it was surprising to me. After coordinating with him one last time, he agreed to see me the following Monday, 4 weeks after his initial intake assessment. He comes into my office and says, "Nice to finally meet you." I responded, "We've met before, Michael. You came here about a month ago. Tell me how you've been so I can understand a little bit more about what's going on." We talk and make a safety plan, which includes getting him an immediate psychiatric evaluation and establishing a regimen of medication. He's all for it. I tell him that I'll see him next Monday for our first session. Over the weekend, he calls me and tells me that he's planning to move to Florida, that he doesn't want to deal with all the bullshit. As this is another safety concern for me, I tell him that I'm willing to help him schedule his psychiatrist appointment and that I'll have sessions with him until he can see the psychiatrist. We plan to meet next Monday. That day, we completed all of the paperwork online to get him an appointment at our local outpatient psychiatric clinic. He appeared grateful for my help and was happy that I would be his therapist. Then, not even 2 days later, he left another message on my answering machine at the office and said that he was going to be terminating treatment, that he didn't want to deal with the bullshit, and that he thinks that his best decision is to return to Florida and pursue his career in the music industry. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Bipolar disorder is confusing and scary, both for people who suffer from the illness and for those who are tasked to treat it. I hope this video gave you a bit more insight into what bipolar disorder actually looks like and sounds like, so you can better distinguish it for yourself should you ever come across it in your own practice. If you're a new practitioner or a student of social work or psychology, the likelihood that you will work with someone with bipolar disorder in your career is virtually 100%. If you're a family member of someone with bipolar disorder, or a person who is suffering from symptoms like this yourself, please reach out for help. Contact your local outpatient psychiatric clinic and schedule an intake assessment. Medication management is a major part of the treatment for bipolar disorder, and it cannot be effectively managed without it. In a system where we feel like our autonomy is being constantly undermined and diminished, it is important to recognize that these medications genuinely save lives. And if you want your life to improve, you must value your life to begin with. You are valuable and worthy, despite your illness. I hope this helps. Until next time.